Your arteries are hardening right now, not from cholesterol deposits that you can test for with a blood panel, not from saturated fat that shows up on a lipid screen, but from a metabolic process triggered by something you ate today without thinking twice about it. This process is called glycation, and it's happening in your blood vessels, in your kidneys, in the lens of your eye, and in your brain at this very moment. Glycation is the chemical bonding of sugar molecules to proteins and fats in your body, creating compounds called advanced glycation end products, or AGGs. And these AGs are one of the primary drivers of aging. Cardiovascular disease, kidney failure, Alzheimer's disease, and blindness in adults over 50. The shocking part isn't that this process exists, it's that the substance causing it is so deeply embedded in the modern diet that most people consume it dozens of times per day without ever connecting it to the health crisis unfolding in their bodies. This isn't about an obscure toxin or a rare contaminant. This is about sugar, not the sugar you put in your coffee, not the sugar in dessert that you know you should limit. This is about the hidden sugar in foods marketed as healthy. The sugar added to bread and pasta sauce and salad dressing and yogurt. The sugar that's driving chronic inflammation, damaging your organs, and stealing decades from your life. And what makes this particularly insidious is that by the time you feel the effects, the damage has been accumulating for years. Hi, I'm Dr. Alex. I'm an emergency medicine doctor, and after nearly 10 years in the emergency department, I've seen the end-stage consequences of what happens when metabolic disease goes unchecked. I've watched patients in their 60s on dialysis because their kidneys failed from diabetes. They didn't know they had. I've treated stroke patients whose arteries were so damaged that small clots caused devastating brain injury. I've seen 50-year-olds lose their vision to diabetic retinopathy. And in almost every case, the pathway to that outcome started decades earlier with dietary patterns that seemed harmless at the time. My goal now is to help people recognize these patterns before the damage becomes irreversible and to prevent the diseases I see in the emergency department every single day. And I want to take just a few seconds here to make you a promise. I promise to keep creating the most helpful videos I possibly can, grounded in the latest research and science to help you live longer and healthier lives. And all I ask in return is that you give this fairly new channel a chance and hit the subscribe button. If you get to the end of this video and you didn't think it was worth your time or you've not learned something new, then feel free to unsubscribe, no hard feelings. But if you give me your time and your attention, I'll give you everything I've learned from over a decade in medicine. So please help me out. Hit the subscribe button to help this channel reach more people like you. And let's continue with the video. Before we talk about what sugar is doing to your body, we need to understand how sugar enters the diet in the first place. And the answer isn't what most people think. It's not primarily through obvious sources like soda and candy. It's through the industrialization of food over the last 50 years. In 1970, the average American consumed about 120 pounds of sugar per year. By 2000, that number had climbed to over 150 pounds per year. That's more than 40 teaspoons of sugar every single day. And the increase didn't come from people eating more dessert. It came from food manufacturers adding sugar to nearly every processed food product to increase palatability, extend shelf life, and replace fat that was removed during the low-fat diet craze of the 1980s and 90s. When fat was demonized, sugar became the replacement. Bread that used to have 2 grams of sugar per slice now has 5 grams. Pasta sauce that was tomatoes and herbs now contains more sugar than ice cream per serving. Yogurt marketed as a health food contains 20 to 30 grams of sugar per cup, which is equivalent to eating 5 to 7 teaspoons of pure sugar. Salad dressings, marinades, condiments, cereals, granola bars, protein bars, and even savory snacks like crackers are loaded with added sugars that don't register as sweet to your taste buds because they're balanced with salt and fat. What this means is that you can follow what looks like a reasonable diet, avoiding soda and dessert, and still be consuming 100 to 150 grams of sugar per day from hidden sources. And your body processes all of it the same way. When you eat sugar, it gets absorbed into your bloodstream as glucose. Your pancreas releases insulin to shuttle that glucose into cells where it can be used for energy or stored as glycogen in the liver and muscles. In a metabolically healthy person, this system works efficiently. Blood sugar rises after a meal, insulin clears it, and blood sugar returns to baseline within a couple of hours. But when you're consuming sugar constantly throughout the day, your blood sugar never returns to baseline. It stays elevated. And when blood sugar stays elevated, two things happen. The first is that insulin stays elevated as well. Chronic high insulin is the root cause of insulin resistance, which is the precursor to type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and metabolic syndrome. The second thing that happens is glycation. When glucose molecules are floating around in your bloodstream in high concentrations for extended periods, they start bonding to proteins and fats in a process that doesn't require enzymes. It's a spontaneous chemical reaction. Glucose is sticky. It binds to hemoglobin in your red blood cells, which is what the hemoglobin A1C test measures. It binds to the proteins in your artery walls, making them stiff and inflexible. It binds to the proteins in your kidneys, damaging the filtration system. It binds to the proteins in the lens of your eye, leading to cataracts. And it binds to the proteins in your brain, contributing to cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease. The compounds formed through glycation are called advanced glycation end products, or AGs. And AGs are exactly what they sound like. They age your tissues, they cross-link proteins, which means they make tissues that should be flexible become rigid. They trigger inflammatory pathways that damage cells and impair function, and they're irreversible. Once an AG is formed, your body cannot break it down. It accumulates over time. Think of AGs like rust on metal. Once the oxidation process begins and rust forms, you can't reverse it back to clean metal. You can only slow down further rusting. The same principle applies to AGs in your body. They represent permanent damage to the molecular structure of your tissues, and they accumulate with every year that your blood sugar remains elevated. This is why diabetics age faster than non-diabetics. Their chronically elevated blood sugar creates more glycation, more AGEs, and more tissue damage. But here's the critical point. You don't have to be diabetic for this process to occur. Glycation happens at any level of blood sugar above baseline. The higher your average blood sugar, the more glycation you experience. And because most adults over 40 are consuming diets that keep their blood sugar elevated for most of the day, glycation is happening in nearly everyone. It's just happening faster and more severely in people with pre-diabetes and diabetes. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that individuals with elevated but non-diabetic blood sugar levels still showed significant AG accumulation in blood, vessels, kidneys, and skin compared to those with tightly controlled blood sugar. This means that the damage begins long before you're diagnosed with diabetes. It begins the moment your diet starts keeping your blood sugar chronically elevated. The study tracked over 2,000 participants for 8 years and found that even small increases in average blood sugar measured by hemoglobin A1C correlated with measurable increases in AG levels and subsequent increases in cardiovascular events, kidney dysfunction, and mortality. The relationship was linear, meaning there was no safe threshold. Every incremental rise in blood sugar produced more damage. This contradicts the common belief that you're fine as long as you're not diabetic. The truth is that the damage exists on a continuum, and it starts well within the normal range if that normal range is chronically elevated by modern dietary standards. Now, the interaction between sugar and inflammation is where the devastation really compounds. Glycation doesn't just damage tissues directly, it also activates the immune system. When AGs accumulate in your tissues, your immune cells recognize them as foreign or damaged material and mount an inflammatory response. This is chronic low-grade inflammation, and it's one of the hallmarks of aging and chronic disease. Inflammation damages the endothelium, which is the inner lining of your blood vessels. When the endothelium is damaged, it becomes permeable, allowing LDL cholesterol particles to enter the artery wall. Once inside, those LDL particles oxidize and trigger further inflammation, leading to the formation of atherosclerotic plaques. This is how sugar contributes to heart disease, not through cholesterol directly, but through the glycation and inflammation pathway that makes your arteries vulnerable to plaque formation. And this is why so many people with normal cholesterol still have heart attacks. Their cholesterol isn't the problem. Their chronically elevated blood sugar and the resulting glycation and inflammation are the problem. Studies have shown that individuals with metabolic syndrome, which is characterized by elevated blood sugar, high triglycerides, and abdominal obesity, have a 3 to 5-fold increased risk of heart attack compared to metabolically healthy individuals, even when LDL cholesterol levels are identical. The difference is the inflammatory and glycation burden driven by sugar. The same inflammatory cascade damages your kidneys. Your kidneys filter blood through millions of tiny structures called nephrons. Each nephron contains a glomerulus, which is a network of capillaries that allows waste to pass through while keeping proteins and cells in the bloodstream. Glycation damages the proteins in the glomerulus, making the filtration barrier leaky. This allows protein to spill into the urine, which is one of the earliest signs of kidney damage. Over time, the damage worsens, the glomeruli become scarred and non-functional. Your kidney function declines, and eventually, if the process continues unchecked, you end up in kidney failure requiring dialysis. Research published in the American Journal of Kidney Diseases found that elevated blood sugar, even in the pre-diabetic range, significantly increases the risk of chronic kidney disease. The relationship is dose-dependent, meaning the higher your average blood sugar, the greater your risk. And the mechanism is glycation. The sugar in your blood is literally damaging the filtration system in your kidneys every single day. What makes this particularly cruel is that kidney damage is silent for years. You don't feel it, there's no pain. The first symptom is often fatigue or swelling in the legs, which happens when kidney function has already declined by 50% or more. By that point, the damage is often irreversible. In the brain, glycation contributes to cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease. The proteins that get glycated in the brain include tau and amyloid beta, which are the same proteins that form the tangles and plaques seen in Alzheimer's patients. Research published in Neurology demonstrated that individuals with higher hemoglobin A1c levels, which reflects average blood sugar over 3 months, had significantly greater rates of brain atrophy and cognitive decline over a 10-year follow-up period. This wasn't limited to diabetics. Even people with blood sugar in the high normal range showed accelerated brain aging compared to those with lower blood sugar. The mechanism is straightforward. Glycation damages neurons and blood vessels in the brain, impairing nutrient delivery and waste removal. Inflammation triggered by AGs further damages brain tissue, and the result is progressive cognitive decline that begins decades before symptoms appear. What we're seeing in emergency departments and neurology clinics today is the result of dietary patterns established 20 to 30 years ago. The brain damage doesn't happen overnight. It accumulates slowly, silently, until function is impaired enough that it becomes noticeable. And by that point, significant portions of the brain have already been lost. This is why prevention is so critical. Once neurons are dead, they don't regenerate. The window for intervention is before the damage occurs, not after. Now, when we understand how sugar damages the body through glycation and inflammation, we automatically understand what prevents that damage. And it comes down to blood sugar control. The goal is not to eliminate carbohydrates entirely. The goal is to keep your blood sugar stable throughout the day, minimizing the peaks that drive glycation and the chronic elevation that keeps insulin high. There are 3 primary strategies that accomplish this, and all 3 are supported by extensive research. The first strategy is reducing added sugars and refined carbohydrates. This means reading labels and eliminating foods with more than 5 grams of added sugar per serving. It means replacing white bread, white rice, and pasta with whole grain alternatives that contain fiber. And it means prioritizing whole foods over processed foods whenever possible. The difference between eating an apple and drinking apple juice illustrates the principle perfectly. An apple contains fiber that slows glucose absorption, resulting in a gradual, moderate blood sugar rise. Apple juice contains the same amount of sugar but no fiber, resulting in a rapid spike that triggers glycation and insulin release. The fiber makes all the difference. The second strategy is meal composition. Protein, fat, and fiber all slow the absorption of carbohydrates, which blunts the blood sugar spike. This means that every meal should contain a substantial source of protein, healthy fats from sources like olive oil, avocados, or nuts, and fiber from vegetables or whole grains. When you eat carbohydrates alone, your blood sugar spikes rapidly. When you eat carbohydrates with protein, fat, and fiber, the absorption is slower and the blood sugar response is more controlled. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition demonstrated that meals with balanced macronutrients produce 30 to 50% lower blood sugar peaks compared to carbohydrate-heavy meals, even when the total carbohydrate content was identical. The composition matters as much as the quantity. A practical example would be comparing a breakfast of toast with jam versus eggs with vegetables and a slice of whole grain toast. The first breakfast is almost entirely carbohydrate and will spike your blood sugar within 30 minutes. The second breakfast contains the same amount of carbohydrate but is buffered by protein and fat, resulting in a gradual rise and fall that keeps your blood sugar stable for hours. The third strategy is meal timing and frequency. Eating smaller, more frequent meals throughout the day keeps blood sugar more stable than eating large meals with long gaps in between. But more importantly, restricting your eating window to 10 to 12 hours per day and avoiding late-night eating gives your body extended periods of low insulin and low blood sugar, which allows for repair processes and reduces cumulative glycation. Studies on time-restricted eating have shown improvements in hemoglobin A1C, fasting glucose, and markers of inflammation, even without changes in total calorie intake or food choices. The timing alone makes a metabolic difference. When you eat your last meal at 7 p.m. and don't eat again until 7 a.m., you're giving your body 12 hours where insulin is low and blood sugar is at baseline. During this fasting window, your body shifts into repair mode, clearing out damaged cells, reducing inflammation, and improving insulin sensitivity. If you're eating until 10 p.m. and then eating breakfast at 6 a.m., you're only giving your body 8 hours of fasting, which isn't long enough to achieve the same metabolic benefits. Beyond dietary changes, there are two additional interventions that significantly reduce glycation and AGE accumulation. The first is physical activity. Exercise increases insulin sensitivity, which means your cells respond more effectively to insulin and clear glucose from the bloodstream faster. This reduces the duration and magnitude of blood sugar elevation after meals. Research published in Diabetes Care found that a 15-minute walk after each meal reduced post-meal blood sugar spikes by 20 to 30% compared to remaining sedentary. The effect was immediate and didn't require high-intensity exercise. A simple walk was enough to shift the glucose from the bloodstream into muscle cells, where it could be used for energy. The second intervention is specific nutrients that inhibit glycation. Alpha-lipoic acid, an antioxidant found in spinach, broccoli, and organ meats, has been shown to reduce AG formation and improve insulin sensitivity. Studies published in the Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry demonstrated that alpha-lipoic acid supplementation reduced markers of glycation and oxidative stress in diabetic patients. Carnosine, a dipeptide found in meat and fish, also inhibits glycation by binding to reactive sugar molecules before they can attach to proteins. And green tea contains polyphenols that reduce both glucose absorption and AGEG formation. These nutrients don't replace dietary changes, but they complement them by directly interfering with the glycation process. Let me bring this back to the emergency department because I want you to see the real-world consequences of ignoring this silent killer. I treated a patient recently who was 58 years old and came in with chest pain. His cholesterol was normal, his blood pressure was controlled with medication, he exercised regularly and didn't smoke. By conventional standards, he was doing everything right, but his hemoglobin A1C was 6.2%, which is pre-diabetic. It had been in that range for 5 years, and his doctor had told him it wasn't high enough to worry about yet. We did a coronary angiogram and found that 3 of his major coronary arteries were 70 to 90% blocked. He required triple bypass surgery. The blockages weren't from cholesterol, they were from glycation and inflammation driven by years of moderately elevated blood sugar that no one treated as urgent. That's the danger of this silent killer. It doesn't cause symptoms until the damage is severe. And by the time you feel it, you're already in crisis. Another patient I saw was a 52-year-old woman who came in with blurred vision. She'd been told she had early cataracts, but the progression was faster than expected. When we checked her labs, her fasting glucose was 118, which is just above normal, and her hemoglobin A1C was 6.0%. She wasn't diabetic by diagnostic criteria, but her blood sugar had been running high enough for long enough that glycation was damaging the proteins in her lens. The ophthalmologist explained that she'd likely need cataract surgery within 2 years. Decades earlier than typical. That's what chronic sugar exposure does. It accelerates aging at the cellular and tissue level. The bigger picture here is that sugar has become so normalized in the modern diet that most people don't recognize it as a threat. We've been told that fat is the villain. We've been told that cholesterol causes heart disease. We've been told to watch our sodium intake for blood pressure, and all of those factors matter. But sugar, particularly the hidden sugar in processed foods, is driving a metabolic crisis that underlies nearly every chronic disease we see in adults over 50. Heart disease, stroke, kidney failure, Alzheimer's disease, vision loss, and accelerated aging all share a common pathway: chronic elevation of blood sugar, glycation, AG accumulation, and inflammation. And that pathway is entirely preventable. You don't need medication to prevent it. You don't need expensive interventions. You need awareness of what you're eating and a commitment to keeping your blood sugar stable. That means reading labels. It means cooking more meals at home where you control the ingredients. It means prioritizing whole foods over processed foods. And it means understanding that the occasional dessert isn't the problem. The problem is the sugar you're consuming without realizing it every single day in foods that don't even taste sweet. The habit of controlling blood sugar through diet, meal composition, and timing is one of the most powerful interventions we have for preventing chronic disease and extending health span. It's more effective than most medications. It's supported by decades of research across multiple fields of medicine. And it addresses the root cause of metabolic dysfunction rather than just managing symptoms. The science is clear, the mechanism is understood, and the consequences of ignoring it are devastating. Glycation and AG accumulation are not theoretical risks. They're measurable, progressive, and directly linked to the diseases that kill and disable millions of people every year. But they're also preventable, and prevention starts with recognizing sugar for what it is, not a harmless indulgence, a silent killer that's hiding in your diet. So here's the bottom line, and this is what I really want you to take away from this. Sugar, particularly hidden added sugar in processed foods, drives a metabolic process called glycation that damages your arteries, kidneys, eyes, and brain. This damage accumulates over decades and manifests as heart disease, kidney failure, vision loss, and cognitive decline. The damage begins long before you're diagnosed with diabetes or metabolic disease. It begins the moment your diet keeps your blood sugar chronically elevated. And the solution is not elimination of all carbohydrates. The solution is awareness, label reading, meal composition that includes protein and fiber, and lifestyle habits like post-meal movement that keep your blood sugar stable. This is preventable. The diseases I see in the emergency department are not inevitable consequences of aging. They're consequences of dietary patterns that can be changed. And the earlier you make those changes, the more damage you prevent. The silent killer in your diet is sugar, and now you know what it does. And finally, just to end, please subscribe to the channel if you found this useful to help me reach more people like you.